Now, normally I do analysis on this show, and since I'm full of myself, I don't really need to share other people's analysis with you. That's my job, right? Except David Bromwich, who's a professor of literature at Yale University, knocked it out of the park. Great analysis of President Obama. Now, look, for 5 years, at least while he's been in office, and longer than that when you take into account him running for office, we've been trying to figure out President Obama. What's he about? Like, why does he do the things that he does? It's so frustrating. He says all these wonderfully progressive things, and then he turns around and does these unbelievable so-called compromises that, in John Boehner's words, give 98% of what the Republicans want to them, right? And that's one of many, many examples you can use. And I think that Bromwich really nailed it in figuring out who Obama is. And so I wanted to share some of his insight with you guys. First of all, he talks about how President Obama is a politician that really had almost no record to speak of, and hence is a person who is open to interpretation on both sides. Now, this is something that other people have said, but there were some facts in there I actually did not know until I read this. For example, I didn't know that he was the editor of the Harvard Law Review without publishing a single article in a law journal. That's amazing. That's how you get into the law review. You do I mean, there's a lot of different ways to get in, but that's supposed to be part and parcel. And to be the editor of the law review without publishing an article. Because you see, if you published an article, you'd have to have a strong position on something. God forbid you should ever have a strong position on anything. And how he got there was as a mediator, okay? I'll bring the conservatives and the liberals together and we'll hash it out, and I won't take a position on any side, but, you know, mediate. Okay. And then in his short legal career, Bromwich points out, there was no remarkable brief that has ever been cited. It's not to say he didn't write any briefs, but nothing of note that has been cited by anyone. Isn't that amazing? You have a legal career, you don't write any. It's amazing, right? During his Senate career, first in the Illinois legislature. Remember the one thing that I gave the Republicans credit for when Obama was running in 2008? Obama would keep voting present. Not yay, present, right? That's such a classic politician move to say, well, I'm here. I don't want you to criticize me later for saying I didn't vote. I voted. I just didn't vote either way. And in the U.S. Senate, you know, he said, oh man, those telecommunication companies trying to get immunity for the illegal warrantless wiretapping. I'm going to filibuster if they try to give that immunity. That was in the primaries. After the primaries were over, yeah, go ahead and give him immunity. Playing both sides. So now, a lot of people know that he plays both sides, but again, some facts that you might not have known. That this idea of leading from behind is not just something that the Republicans tar him with, and I've said this before on the show as well. That's a rare criticism of him from the right that's actually true. Now, the right wing throws such nonsense at him that they almost help him, because they've got all these stupid conspiracy theories. He's Kenyan, he's Muslim, he's with the birth certificate, he eats his hamburger the wrong way, literally something Sean Hannity said. And so it winds up helping him because it's such crap that you can't see the real criticism when it's justified. And one of the things is this leading from behind. Now, it's ironic because it came about in Libya, and I actually supported the Libya policy, and I think that it was fairly sensible to say, hey, you know what, we're going to let NATO lead on this. Yes, it's going to be our Air Force, our logistics, etc., but we don't want to put in ground troops. We don't want to seem like we're invading a third Middle Eastern country. And they floated that, and then when it didn't work and Fox News beat them up on it, they withdrew it. But it's actually a bigger policy for President Obama throughout his entire career, leading from behind. So, for example, on the health care policy, the most important one, the one that was Obamacare, that's what it resulted in. They said, we're going to give it to 5 different committees in Congress, and we're going to sit back and let them deal with it. It was eventually called Obamacare. You can't lead from behind on that. And for a while, that created a huge mess and took so much more time, a time in which he almost lost his filibuster-proof majority. And of course, there was huge issues with that when the final vote came to play. Now, but that's not all. Here's the thing I didn't know. In his book, Dreams from My Father, he talks about a situation where he was a community organizer, and he got these 2 women who were complaining about a very legitimate issue that needed to be resolved with a person who could resolve it from the housing project. And President Obama talks in the book, it's his book, he writes about it, how he told the women what to do, then he went to the back of the gym and watched. And then the women didn't quite carry it out the right way, but instead of stepping up and saying, hey, wait, let me resolve this or bring you guys together, or maybe better yet, advocate for them, sat in the back of the gym. And he's like, oh yeah, they didn't carry it out right, so they lost. I mean, that's literally leading from behind, right? So he's been doing this for a long time. Now, third part of this that's frustrating as to what President Obama's been doing is a story about how he was approached before the 2000 election by labor leaders, community organizers, foreign policy dissenters, and groups concerned with minority rights and environmental protection. And he did what FDR had done back in the day. He literally cupped his ear like this and said, "I can't hear you," okay? Meaning, oh, you're going to have to accrue such power and influence that I can't help but react to what you're doing, and so you're going to have to force me into action. He brags about that. But what is that? That's leading from behind. I won't go ahead and say, I'm going to stick up for labor rights. I'm going to stick up for minority rights. I'm going to stick up for progressive principles. You're going to have to force me to come behind you on these issues. And by the way, it's not FDR's day. Professor Bromwich makes a great point. Back in FDR's days, unions were incredibly strong. And they could create such events that would force a president into action. We're not in those days. So Obama sits back and goes, well, the big business groups are really powerful. They made me do a lot of things. You guys aren't as powerful, so I didn't do anything that was progressive. Bold leadership. We really appreciate that. And it's not that he is hostile to those groups. It's that he thinks, that's my leadership. I sit in the back of the gym and hope for the best. Okay. The other part of this that's important is he thinks that symbols and gestures and speeches are as important as actual action, which of course they are not. But finally we get, and I'll encompass that in the last point here, because the last point I think is the best one. He says, Professor Bromwich does in this article, perhaps the thin connection between Obama's words and his action does not support the use of the word conviction at all. Let us say instead that he mistook his preferences for convictions. Wow. When I read that, I was like, okay, that's it. I don't know why I never thought of it in that way, but he nailed it. That's exactly right. President Obama doesn't have convictions. He has preferences. That's why you can sit in the back of the gym and be like, well, okay, if that's what the committees decide, if the labor movement makes me do that, if that's what NATO has decided, okay, I mean, I would prefer to do X, Y, or Z, but since I don't have any real convictions, oh, okay, instead the Chamber of Commerce and the Republicans made me do this. Okay, then I'll do that. Oh, well. He goes on to explain. He can still be trusted to tell us what he would prefer to do, which he does often. He constantly gives speeches about what he would prefer. Remember during the healthcare debate? I would prefer to have the public option. Oh, I couldn't get the public option. What could I do? He says, Professor Bromwich does, review the record and it will show that his first statement on any given issue generally lays out what he would prefer. Later on, he resigns himself to supporting a lesser evil, which he tells us is temporary and necessary. I would prefer to close Guantanamo Bay, oh, but I had to keep it open because of what the evil Republicans did. So, but don't worry, it's temporary. We will eventually close down Guantanamo Bay, and besides which, it's necessary to protect us because there's certain people in there that I will hold indefinitely, just like Dick Cheney did, and never give them a trial. But don't worry, it's temporary and necessary. And Bromwich continues, such is Obama's belief in the power and significance of his own words, that as he judges his own case, saying the right thing is a decent second best to doing the right thing. Once again, devastating. President Obama thinks, well, I gave a great speech about that. I told you that eventually we'll stop using the drones. I'm not going to stop using the drones, but I told you it was a bad idea. Doesn't that count? And look, I'm kind of going in the right direction. I said the right thing. Oh, on the abuses of civil liberties. I gave a great speech about it. I continued and actually added on top of the Bush-Cheney policies in that direction, but I gave a nice speech. He also explains that he fits whichever room he's in. And this I have said many times before. And Bromwich says he talked like Hyde Park when he was in Hyde Park. He talks like Citigroup when he's at a table with Citigroup. He enjoys blending in. That's what this president is about. You want to know what he is? That's what he is. He's a political chameleon, and whatever room he's in, and right now, unfortunately, he's in the bubble of Washington, he will conform to it. And that's exactly what he's done. He's Washington conventional wisdom 101 at this point. And he's so afraid of what Bromwich calls the horror of unsuccess. Oh my God, don't say I'm not successful. I've got to be successful. Okay, how do I prove it to you, depending on whichever room I'm in? He says, as an adapter to the thinking of men of power, Obama was a quick study. And I agree with that. Finally, the end of the article is, the hard judgment of posterity may be that in addressing the greatest threat of the age, Barack Obama taught America dimly, worked part-time at half measures, was silent for years at a stretch, and never tried to lead. His hope must be that his reiterated preference will count more heavily than his positive acts. Now that last part, perhaps a touch too tough on him. I think taught America dimly is a bit much. I know that he didn't do the right framing, and I would agree with that. But the rest of it, unfortunately, is far too true. Half measures, maybe that's too kind to him. Usually they're far less than half measures. And a lot of speeches, but not a lot of action. And he's going to leave with very little change and say, oh, well, I tried. It was my preference to do more, but I just couldn't. And that right there is the difference between preference and conviction, and the difference between a president who takes action and President Obama.